Rebellious Studio presents the Mind Body Podcast with your host, Maria Angelova. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to the Mind Body Podcast, your rebellious podcast with me, your host, Maria. It is all about a strong body, calm mind, healing, and fully living. And it is my absolute pleasure today to welcome Tim Baird. Did I pronounce that correctly, Tim?
Yep, you got it, Tim Baird.
There we go. And I'm very excited to have Tim here because I think he has an incredible story that's full of inspiration. And I met him through a mutual friend. And I heard his story and I was like, you have to come up on the podcast because you're definitely a rebel. So Tim, let's start with 3 words that describe you. Tell people who you are by giving us those words and a little story behind them.
All right. Well, I think grit is probably the first word. I just have this ability to continue to push forward even when things are really tough. I would say another one is positivity. I can find the silver lining inside of a brick. And so when life gets really hard, I'm able to redirect, how I see the situation. And then if I can find that little piece of hope that I can latch onto, then that's enough to drag me through that difficult season.
Great.
And then I think the last one's probably consistency. So I don't always get there the fastest, but I will find some way to keep on getting back up. And, I might do things wrong, but it's when I look back, a lot of times, there's seasons of my life where I've achieved big things and I could have done it in half the time, but I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But here's the thing is 99% of people will quit along that journey. And even though it took me longer, I'm one of the people who finishes.
You're on the journey, you're staying on the journey. I think that's so important, Tim, because I joke with my tribe and I say, I'm like a turtle that keeps moving, but I'm moving, right? And I also think it's important, it's something that I preach very much, is that there are really no wrong things, right? Everything that goes wrong is really a lesson for us. And there is something to learn there and something to take that will help us down the road. So I guess that goes along with the positivity spin that you just talked about, how you view things. Tim, share a little bit about, you have an incredible story, and I think your grit and seeing the positive is very obvious into how you took something that I think would be viewed by many as a negative, and you made the most out of it, and it helped you transform your life.
Yeah. So kind of what got me into real estate, right? This is, I think for our purposes, probably the start of our story, or start of my story, is I had a background in engineering and economics, and I was working for an engineering company in project management. So I used to design cell phone networks, and I would, kind of work in 2 jobs, project management and as a design engineer, while I was putting my wife at the time through college. And unfortunately, it was in 2018, I found out that she was, to say it nicely, seeing other people outside of our marriage. And so it was a very, I think, traumatic experience. I was head over heels in love with that person. And I come from a family where I've been blessed of really no one in my family's been divorced. And that's not what I wanted either. And so, I was in this position of where it felt like my world was turned upside down. And I remember feeling very passionate that day when all of this was revealed, that I had a very limited window of where I needed to identify my next opportunity. And what I mean by that is, if I backpedal a little bit, when I was briefly in the military, and that's a story for another day, but when I got out, I was not expecting to live an adult life as a civilian. I thought I was going to be career military. And so when I got out, I really failed to identify what my next mission was. And I struggled for an entire year, just flapping around, not really being a productive human being. And so in this season of where I was trying to cope with my wife's affair, I made a commitment to myself that I knew this was my next big life transition. And so I said, hopefully she'll come around and we'll fix our marriage. If not, I can at least promise myself that I'm not going to waste another year of my life in transition. And so I got on the computer and I looked up other job opportunities, was just trying to find some silver lining, right? Something that I could be hopeful about and feel like, hey, if this part of my life is all going to crap, at least I've got this other thing that I'm building over here and I could put some hope and time and energy into. And I looked at other engineering jobs. I looked at starting my own business. And then I saw an Indeed.com ad for Keller Williams Realty. And so I signed up for a career day. And then I went to that career day and I signed up for real estate classes that night. And so during this season, it was, I was still going to marriage counseling with my now ex-wife, but I was also going to night school after working my full-time job to get my real estate license. And then all of a sudden I had finished this class and was in a position of where all I had to do was take my state exam. And it was probably about 2 months as I was in this very, very tough season of life where it was pretty clear I was going to have to get divorced if I wanted any level of stability in my life again. And so I had a very good friend who also runs a business, and he called me and said, hey, come have dinner with me and my wife. And after dinner, he goes, Tim, we're going to India. It's like, what? He's like, yeah, like tomorrow we're going to India. Like, it's okay for you to get divorced. Like, you've done everything in your power to save your marriage. And that was something I'd struggled with for almost 6 months. And when he told me that, I finally felt that place of peace that I could call I called my attorney and said, hey, give me the papers. I'm going to give them to my partner tomorrow. And the only problem with this plan is I had to take my real estate exam before I went to India. And so I said, I can't go tomorrow, but book the ticket for 2 days out. And I had to drive to Savannah, Georgia, about a 4.5-hour drive the following morning. So, it's 6 p.m. or something. We're having this conversation. The next day I'm up at 4 a.m. driving to Savannah, took my real estate exam. I passed, I activated my license. And then the next day, we're on a plane and we went to India for almost 3 weeks.
First of all, I have to say thank you for your courage to share your personal story. Really, my hope behind that is that you're going to give courage to people who are in similar situations to, almost get permission to say sometimes things don't work out, right? And it's okay to acknowledge that and move forward. So thank you for that. And then 2, sometimes I think misfortunes show up as opportunities, right? In weird ways that we don't expect. Tell us about that India trip and what did that do for you?
Well, I definitely agree with your comment there, about misfortunes creating opportunities, because I personally had always shared this dream of being an entrepreneur and running a business. And I don't think I ever would have stepped out on the ledge and given myself that chance if I hadn't been faced with being in this position of feeling like I'd already lost everything. So I joke with people that the best time to take the biggest risk of your life is when you feel like you've already lost everything. So I wasn't
nothing else to lose.
So yeah, it reminds me of that phrase, life happens for you. I don't like when people say everything happens for a reason, because if someone's going through something traumatic or tragic in their life, I don't think that God or the universe wanted that thing to happen to you so that you could have this other opportunity. But I do think that God and the universe works in ways that are for you as an individual. And so when a terrible and unfortunate and traumatic thing happens in our lives, it's okay to accept that, hey, if we look at this experience through a different lens and we're open to the possibilities of new opportunities, there is a way that whether it's a year or 5 years down the road, that we're able to look back on that traumatic experience and say, okay, like life happened for me. Look at all these great things that have come out of that situation. I'm not happy I had to go through that thing, but it is helpful that now I can look back at what happened to me and say, well, there's a lot of purpose that came out of that.
A lot of growth that comes out of it. And, tell me if you agree with that. I see a lot of times people, and whether it's pain, sometimes it's physical pain, or sometimes it's a loss of a loved one, divorce, loss of a job, anything like that, that's considered a bad thing, creates urgency in us. And it's like, okay, now what? What do I do from here? And it just nudges us to go like, okay, I got to do something different than what I'm doing right now. What is that? And then that pushes us on the road of growth, personal growth.
Absolutely. Well, and that you just reminded me, Gary Keller, because I work at Keller Williams. That's where I run my real estate team. But it was probably my first year of real estate. It's amazing how the little pieces all kind of line up. I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he talks about how the reason that he's a billionaire and not a millionaire is because he got divorced. And he was in a position where his heart was crushed, and basically he had to pay a lot of money to his soon-to-be ex-wife. And so he said for him to be successful, it was no longer a question of, oh, I can make a few $1,000,000 a year. It was, holy crap, if I'm going to do this, I now have to think this much bigger. And that's why Keller Williams is a thing, is he was forced through pain to think bigger. And Keller Williams would have never existed in the capacity that it does today if he hadn't have gone through that.
Yeah. And I see that a lot. I know it's personally, I've shared with you some of my story that when things tanked was like, okay, now what?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do now, right? And it's like, if you want to pull yourself out, you got to do something different than have a self-pity party. That needs to be over. So, yeah. So thanks again for sharing your personal story. Tell us about the India trip and what did that do for your team?
Well, I'll tell you, it was a very big culture shock. Everything is just it's different enough that I felt like I was completely disconnected from all of my problems in the US. And I'll tell you, I couldn't have planned a trip like this. It was just so many incredible things took place. Like, the day that I landed in India, and my friend who lived there, him and his wife, who were from Georgia, they picked me up at the airport and they took me to their company's office, because the way their company works is they have 2 12-hour shifts. So it was like 2 a.m. and their night shift was halfway through their shift. And I show up and I'm talking with some of their employees, and there's sometimes a bit of a language barrier, but most people in India speak excellent English, at least in Delhi where we were at. And this guy, I think his name was G2. He hears that I'm very into motorcycles. And so he's like, oh, you have to come outside and ride my motorcycle. Given I had just been in an airport or on a plane for like 22 hours, had not slept well. And yet I was just like, I'm here for the experience. And so at 2 a.m., I'm riding a Royal Enfield down the streets of Delhi, which apparently they ride on a different side of the road, which I had to learn pretty quick. And it was just there was constant experiences that were just like that. I gave myself the freedom to, I think, take a little bit of risk and just say yes to a lot of things. And I didn't always know what was next, but my friends who lived there were great at planning excursions for us. So we spent a couple days in Delhi, which is, a big city. Everything is very tight to each other. But what was cool is while we were there, I got to meet a lot of their friends from their church in India. And so it was a very spiritual experience, right? Of these people, Christianity in their part of the world is not always the most popular religion. And yet these people are extremely faithful. And so it was this season of life where I've had my issues with religion, and yet their heart of being there for me and just being energetic and loving life, it was incredible. And it just really was nurturing a part of my soul that needed healing. And then the second part of that trip, where we spent the bulk of our time, was we actually took another plane and went up to Northeast India to a place called Assam. So we went to Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and right actually up to the border of where Bangladesh is. And the Northeast India is still much more tribal, much more kind of like some places we were literally walking through jungles and driving four-wheel drive Jeeps. And up there, it was a much slower pace. You know, we would see some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. We stayed for 2 days in Cherrapunji, which used to be the rainiest city in the world. So everything's just lush and green. And every place we stopped, you know, we got little, you know, cups of tea on the side of the road, little dumplings. I think they were called momos. And me and my three friends that I was traveling with, you know, we just had incredible conversation. And it allowed me the freedom to disconnect from everything that was going on in the US. And I'll be honest, I was invited to stay when I was up in Nagaland, and I really thought about it because I had spent months in extreme heartache in just where I hadn't slept in a bed for almost 6 months because it was so traumatic. Every time I would lay in a bed, my mind would ruminate with terrible images. And I was back on this trip, I was sleeping in a bed. And so it was like that level of disconnection was so important to just kind of me restarting my life.
Love it. And I love that some of the words that you're using: healing, right? Disconnecting and allowing yourself the time and the space to truly heal your soul, right? Because you were hurt. And so important, because I think we forget that we're humans and we go through things. And sometimes we do need to give ourselves the permission to take time away and to just nurture ourselves. And then the other word you mentioned, Tim, that resonates highly with me is freedom. And I know you have now built a very different lifestyle for yourself, one of freedom, which I use that as part of my marketing, right? Build a life of freedom. Talk to us about what freedom means to you. And in the context of also self-care and taking care of yourself and healing, like, how do you tie those two words together? Because that's something that I do tie together very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, freedom means that I get to identify what my vision is. So I get the right to choose, you know, my vision and my mission. And then I get to ultimately decide how I want to try and go out and accomplish that. And I'll tell you that freedom, when I phrase it that way, doesn't mean that I get to do whatever I want.
Disciplined too.
As Jocko Willink says, discipline breeds freedom. And so with the goals that I have and the mission that I've identified that I want to achieve, right? That's the freedom piece. There's no way I could ever hit these goals if I'm not being disciplined. And so there are plenty of times where I try to do it my way and it doesn't work. And then I have to go and I've hired 2 coaches. So one is a mindset coach and one is a business coach. And through their help, sometimes I get to keep the mission that I've identified, but I have to do it their way because they're the ones with the experience and they know it works.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this balance. And I think some people get too far out on a limb of thinking that freedom is that I have no responsibilities or that I can do whatever I want. But ultimately, I think that leads to a lot of disappointment. Yeah. And so where I feel the most free is when I'm working towards a goal that is my choice, and yet I'm working within a system of accountability that keeps me on track.
It produces results that you want to see, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I agree with that. And talk a little bit about self-care, because you are very consistent and disciplined about your self-care. And how do you tie that to living the life that you want to live?
Yeah. So self-care for me, right, I tie it into two components. There's mental energy that we can boost through self-care, and there's also physical energy that we can boost through self-care. When either one of those energies gets low, we're not going to be able to perform at our best. And I joke that, when I was 18, I could drink, sleep, party, and still get up at 4 a.m. and go run 5 miles, and then, be on duty at 7. It was, and there might have been some truth to that, but the goals that take a longer time to develop, right, require a higher level of consistency. And so there was, as I was just like constantly trying to figure out how do I show up and be more energized? How do I show up and actually have more capacity to do more? And ultimately, right, every great leader is the person with the most amount of energy.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get people to follow you when you're slumped over in your chair and not excited about life. So I had to fix that. And so I went down this journey of reading a ton of books. Like I said, I also got my mindset coach. We meet every other week. And I've put together a very solid morning routine. So I do pretty much the same thing every single morning, and then I could tell you in detail if you care about my morning routine, but it's all time blocked on my calendar. And then the other big principle is ultimately having a great morning dictates the ability to have a great day. And we only get to have that great morning if we have a great evening the night before.
Slept well, right?
Exactly. And so, because when I first started this journey, I was looking at all these, influencers online. Oh, I get up at 4:30, I get up at 5 a.m. and I'm able to do all this stuff. And I was trying it and it just wasn't working. And so then I had to figure out, okay, well, it's because I'm not getting enough sleep. And then it was, oh, well, my quality of sleep isn't as high. So now I've given myself, right, if I want to gain the freedom to have my mind turn off at night, well, that means at 8 p.m., I'm looking at my calendar right now, at 8 p.m., I'm going to go around the house, make sure everything's tidied up, make sure that my food is prepped for the following day, make sure my laundry's done, make sure that, my cat boxes are scooped so the cats are happy and well fed, so that I can then sit down, review my calendar, time block, and review my goals for the following day. And I journal all my to-dos out the night before. So that way, when I sit down on my bed and I do my evening meditation routine, which is with the Headspace app, after that 15 to 20 minutes of meditation, my mind is free and I'm ready to sleep. And then even though I'm only sleeping from 10 p.m. to 4:45 or 5 a.m., it's only about a 7-hour window. I guarantee you I wake up more refreshed than the average person who slept for 10 hours.
Right? Yes. Yeah. Super important. And I would say I've had the privilege of seeing some of Tim's organization, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes me feel like a slacker, as organized as I think I am. So structure, consistency, and discipline, I think, are great for getting the results that you want and then living the life that you want. So I'm glad you kind of tied those together, because I think they're key. And you can run an efficient day if you're dragging and you haven't slept and you're trying to boost that energy through caffeine or energy drinks or anything like that. You have to have the proper rest, the proper nutrition, the proper movement, and all that. So, all right, Tim, let's see. What is one piece of advice you give to anybody who wants to change their life?
Well, one piece of advice to help somebody change their life, I would say get into a community of like-minded individuals. Whatever the dream is that's going to change your life or give you the life you've always wanted, you can only become the type of person who has the ability to achieve that dream if you're in the right group of people and if your mindset is right. And so I understand, like, within my business, for example, it's an individual effort. And yet, because I've surrounded myself with colleagues who I've been able to lean on, not only for advice that is specifically related to my business, there's also been a lot of mindset pieces. And when I see someone who can share their story about how they overcame a terrible situation, and now I see them with their beautiful wife and beautiful kids, and they're making more money than I ever thought was possible, and they're good, genuine human beings, well, that gives me hope to keep pushing. And so it's hard. I don't know how to identify what that would look like for every person.
Different for everybody, yes.
But I do know that if you have a dream, and you can find the right people to boost your mindset and encourage you and cut out the people who are not doing that for you, then your mindset is going to change. And ultimately, one of the greatest gifts of achieving a dream and changing your life is the type of person you become in the process.
Absolutely.
Because even now, as I'm setting my business goals for the year and my 5-year goals, I had a mentor, and he told me, he said, Tim, the only goals worth having are the ones that require you to change who you are. You have to become a different and better version of yourself to achieve that goal. And if you can do it, being the same person you are today, then it's not a big enough goal.
I always ask myself, what would the person who I want to be would do right now? Right? It's a good reminder of where are you going, and are you acting like the person you want to become?
Yeah.
Because you definitely have to think differently, act differently for where you're going. And if you think that the same actions and the same thinking would take you to the next level, that's not going to happen. You have to grow outside the comfort zone. All right, Tim, let's end with, what's your definition of rebel and rebellious?
Ooh, my definition of rebellious. Well, I would say my definition of rebellious is to identify what's most important to you in your life, and then set out the plan and go after it.
Love it. Yes. Thank you, Tim. Those people who would like to follow you, what's the best way to get in touch with you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at Tim Jobin Baird. And then also, if you just Google Tim Baird, Keller Williams, you'll find a link to my Facebook page, and also a link to my email address, which is timbaird@kw.com.
Fantastic. Tim, I'm really grateful for your time and for the inspiration and for your vulnerability. Thank you so much. And dear Rebels, thanks for listening. Do let us know if you have any questions. Stay rebellious and make it a rebellious day. We'll see you next time. Bye. Can't get enough of those rebellious conversations? Do make sure you subscribe, like, and share with your friends.